Good evening, everyone. Sorry, this is the slightly delayed thought for the day. Um, hope you've had a good day and welcome to Christchurch Daily. It's just a short thought to help us keep fixed on Jesus in the midst of everything that is going on. So, I called my blog today Jesus Stopped because that is a line from one of my favourite stories in the Bible, in one of the Gospels. And as it's Palm Sunday this Sunday, I thought it might be good to look at some of the events in Jesus's life, kind of leading up to that point. So this story in Matthew's Gospel is like the story straight before we go into Palm Sunday and Jesus comes into Jerusalem. And it's a small story, it's easily overlooked, but it paints the most beautiful picture of what God is like. So let me just read it to you. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. Two blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard Jesus passing by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and they followed him. So it's just this really short story from Matthew chapter 20, verse 29 to 34, if you want to look it up. And I just love it, actually, because I think Jesus must have been carrying a lot at this moment on time. He's walking towards Jerusalem. In Luke's Gospel, there's this moment where it says he set his face towards Jerusalem. So he's walking towards the cross, effectively, and the weight of everything he's about to do must have been heavy on his shoulders. And as usual, there's a crowd that are following him. There are people that are just clamoring for his attention, and he is hemmed in on all sides by noise and by need. And amidst this kind of clamour of voices, two blind men cry out to him. And the rest of the crowd just dismissed them as totally unimportant, too insignificant to take up Jesus's precious time. But the men are persistent, shouting all the louder, which I really like that line. And Jesus stops for them. Jesus is just so interruptible. And I really love that about him. I am not interruptible. I am a planner. I'm a control freak. I really like to know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm finding this season really hard, is because all of my little structures and routines that I used to pin my day on just got systematically dismantled, and I have no control over anything. And COVID-19 really has laid waste to our plans, and it has caused interruption on a global scale that is unprecedented, and everyone has needed to readjust. And I just wonder, what is God trying to teach us in the midst of that? There's something just really compelling about Jesus's actions here. He stops. So simple. He allows his attention to be completely redirected from what he was doing to something else, and he rearranges his priorities around the need that is directly in front of him. I find that really hard. I have like a hierarchy in my mind of the things that I need to get done in a day and what I think my needs are and what I think other people's needs are. And I really struggle to cope when something kind of sideswipes in on it and then I have to readjust everything. I want to be really useful in the middle of this crisis, but I find that the need that is most obvious to me and is actually most obviously in front of me is the need of my kids and my children, and they are taking almost all of my time, and it's driving me slightly bonkers. But I think sometimes I'm too distracted, like by the noise of the crowd and by whatever else is going on, to actually focus on them when they are just as much in need as anybody else at this moment in time, that they are struggling and lost and confused as well. There's this missionary called Heidi Baker who is just wonderful and probably like a little bit crazy, but in the best way. And I always remember reading one of her books where she talks about like how we stop for the one, and if everybody could just stop for the one person that was in front of them, then the whole world would actually be changed. So she says this, she says, Jesus would go anywhere, talk to anyone, and wherever he went, he would stop for the one. So I just wonder, who is the one in our lives today? Because there's going to be, like Jesus in the midst of that crowd, there's going to be so many needs that are pressing in on us, so many unanswered texts, so many like WhatsApps that we haven't responded to, or people that we thought of. But actually, if we just sit and ask God and spend time in prayer, then who is the one person in our life that actually we can dedicate some time to, that we can allow ourselves to be interrupted by today? And I guess the beautiful thing about this story is the flip side, that as people following Jesus, we want to model his behaviour and be the kind of people that are interrupted and that do stop for others who need our help. But we also get to be the people who interrupt Jesus. And that is so great. It's so amazing that we are able to interrupt the creator of the universe. And he is so happy to be interrupted by us. In this story, when Jesus hears the voices of those two blind men, the rest of the crowd just dismiss them straight off the bat. But Jesus instinctively and instantly just turns and gives them his full attention, and he responds to them and he says, actually, what do you want me to do for you? Which seems like a really strange question, because on the one hand, their need is really obvious, they can't see anything. But there is such a dignity in asking, in Jesus not assuming that he knows, even though he does know, but this kind of the dignity of that question, saying, actually, what is it that you want me to do? And Jesus takes his time with them and he inclines his ear to them. I used to know this guy who was in his 60s. I guess he's in his 70s now. And I've never met anybody else quite like him. He'd been a follower of Jesus since he was a teenager. And so he'd been doing this thing for a really long time. And I remember when he used to talk to you, and he would look at you directly in the eye, and it was as though you were the only person in the world. It was as though you were just the person that his whole attention was on, and he wasn't distracted by other things. And I think that is really Christ-like. I think that is really like Jesus, and I think that's what Jesus does in this instant, in this story, is that he focuses his full attention on these two men that need his help, and he just kind of leaves behind him all the other stuff that is going on. And that is the way that he responds to us. Jesus' ear is inclined to us, and he is ready to respond to us as we call out to him, whether it's a whisper or a shout or a kind of whether it's joy or sorrow or just sheer exasperation if you have children. Jesus is ready and he's willing to help out, but it does require us to ask him, to call on him. So the two men in the story, they could have just carried on sitting by the roadside, kind of in whatever state they were in their anger, in their frustration, in their rejection, but instead they call out to the one who can save them from it. And I need to remember that today. I needed to remember it this morning, and I've tried to remember it today. And at points I've succeeded and I've prayed, and at points I haven't. But Jesus is waiting to hear our voice. He's waiting to hear our prayer, and he's waiting to respond, just as he responded to the needs of those two blind men. So I just encourage us today, from that example of those two men who just shouted louder when they wanted to get God's attention. And I'll just finish with these verses from Isaiah, which are just a promise. Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. Therefore he will rise up and show you compassion. How gracious he will be when you cry for help. As soon as he hears, he will answer you. Okay. Amen, guys. See you soon.